agenda, we want to welcome you to Africa News Night at the Posner Center in Denver. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
I'm going to try to get the volume up a little bit so we can hear you a little bit clearly. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Can everybody hear Dr. Bongang?
Does the mic work? Does the microphone work?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Okay. So we thank you for joining us on this 2019 World Press Freedom Day in Denver, Colorado. And we have been talking about African news and the things that are going on in the news. And we appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I'm going to go just right into some of the questions that we have for you. But before we do that, I want to just make a quick introduction. You are a professor of journalism and political science at Savannah State University. And I also understand you've been I know you have been a former journalist. I would say one of the pioneer journalists with the Cameroon Radio and Television. Now you are in the business of journalism. You are a teacher. We want to talk to you. Maybe you can do a quick introduction. Tell us just a little bit about you, and then we'll get right into the questions, Dr. Bongang.
Yes, as you say, I started in Cameroon as a radio journalist, and I eventually became a television producer and director, and I came to the United States in '92 as a Hubert Humphrey Fellow. I was at Boston University, where I did a master's in journalism. I did some work at the United Nations Radio, and eventually studied international studies for my master's and doctorate at the University of South Carolina in Columbia. And since 2001, I have been teaching at Savannah State University. And in the last 10 years or so, I've been shuttling between the journalism and political science departments. And in the political science department, I've chaired the department, I think it's 3 times now. But now I'm happy to be just teaching.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Dr. Bongang. We have a small audience here with us at our Posner Center office in Denver, and today, like you know, it's World Press Freedom Day 2019. We have been talking about African news, the rights that we as citizens, people from the African continent that we have to be able to speak up, to speak out, this business of journalism, the reporting of the news, and a lot of other things. We also have Dr. Luka Powanga with us here. He's from Regis University. We have had that discussion. So I want to get right into some of the questions. The first question that I want to talk about is building credibility that's professional credibility for journalists working in high pressure environments. I can take, for example, Nigeria. There were elections in Nigeria last year. There were elections in Senegal, and there are elections coming up in South Africa. And journalists are under a lot of pressure to report the news. Now, sometimes there are constraints with that reporting of the news, and journalists have to build credibility for that news to be trusted. So what are your thoughts? What do you have to say on when there are pressures on reporters to report the news, to report it fast and report it accurately? But very often, as we know, that doesn't happen.
Yes, I think the problems are deep-rooted and they are complex. And I would start by just an anecdote. I was in Cameroon a couple of years ago now for the last 3 years every December, and I've been trying to set up a workshop for journalism. And why did I think about that? Because I went to in 2015, and I was appalled at the quality of newspapers and the reporting on radio and on television that I saw. And the reason was that there was a time when we practiced as journalists in Cameroon, coming out of journalism training, where we were working for a government media, and we were the ones fighting for the liberalization of the media. And it came, but it came with problems, because now the place is flooded with all the private media organizations, radios and television. But these are business enterprises, and I realize that they've forgotten the the most important part of it, which is training the journalists. You have enthusiastic young people who want to be journalists, but they don't have the basics, the fundamentals of the profession. So democracy on the continent, I can say with some certainty that it's in a crisis, because until you have people who know the fundamentals of what journalism is, then we cannot get there. And they become easy victims to regimes, autocratic regimes, that would find fault and legitimately with these journalists who do not know the left from the right. So that is one of the main problems. So how do we get out of that? We can only get out of that when the owners of the media are genuinely interested in the media as an instrument of development, an instrument of democracy. But unfortunately, and I may be wrong, what I have observed very, very casually is that these are people who are interested in advertising, making money, but they are not in the business of challenging authority or of exposing or of educating the population on what democracy is about. So we have a problem.
Are there any ideas on what you think needs to be done? Cameroon may be that exception of an autocratic system there's clamp down on the press. Do you have some suggestions on what those journalists, especially when we're talking about world press freedom, how can journalists, the young ones, how can they get themselves out of this difficult situation?
It is not going to be easy, because your initiative is laudable, and I really applaud you for doing this. But we have got to really, especially those of us who are lucky to be in the diaspora, begin to examine what are the things we can do to help our colleagues back home. Now, thanks to technology, there are things we could do. We can begin to do online courses, figure out what kinds of things we can do to help colleagues who are reporting the news. And one of the things that alarmed me was there is no distinction between news reporting, opinion writing, and what have you. It is everybody writes a story and is already commenting on it. And so the basic of, a regular newspaper would have the news stories that reporters have reported. And then you would have a section for commentary and opinion writing, the op-ed pages. And those are the kinds of things I was thinking if I was able to organize my workshop and get colleagues on the ground so that we can do this regularly. We'll begin to gradually train some of the reporters to know these basics, and then figure out what of the universities that are there can be training more journalists to be professional. And until that is done, we will be in a problem.
On this World Press Freedom Day 2019, is there a particular message that you want to send to the young people in Cameroon? We know, there are all kinds of statistics about the number of young people who are in these African countries. In some countries, 60% of the population is made of people under 25 years of age. Is there a message that you want to send to these young people in the African continent, the ones that are in the diaspora? What do you want to tell them?
It's very important that we should educate ourselves first on detecting the news that is not news, and that is not going to be easy. I'm working as we speak on a course that I'm teaching in the summer about writing about politics in the era of fake news, and that is a danger to democracy, not only in Africa but in America and in Europe, because the technologies of the internet and the mobile technologies have given us tremendous opportunities, but they are also the greatest danger to democracy and to freedom. And so the message I could say is be alert, be careful about what you push forward, what you share on the internet, what you share on Facebook, because there are very crafty people who are targeting and sending messages that are not, they look very real, but these are false messages, and they target people who are vulnerable to that. Brexit is an example. What happened in England with the Brexit vote is a classic example of that. What happened in the United States in 2016 is another example of that. So it is not a problem that is unique to developing countries. It's a global phenomenon. So on World Freedom Day, I think it is a call to all who want to see the press play the traditional role it was meant to play, which is speaking truth to power, that we should all be alert to a danger that is going to bring down a lot of countries before we figure out how to get out of it.
Okay, thank you very much for that remark. So, Dr. Bongang, I have two more questions for you before we get to our audience here for a little bit of a discussion. The other one, when I was talking with you yesterday, I didn't realize that apart from Africa Agenda, there are a lot of other individuals who are concerned with the reporting of African news, which is one of at the very foundation of this organization, that African people of African descent, when they look at the way that the continent is portrayed in the news, there are lots of complaints, but we haven't been able to translate that into action. And I realize that this looks like something that you have been working on as well. And I didn't know that until yesterday. So tell me, what do you think is wrong with the reporting of African news?
Oh yeah, it's obvious, because I've had the opportunity first of being in the School of Journalism in Boston area. Boston, you know, is a center of universities. I was in Boston University, so I was hanging out with my fellow Boston University journalists who are all over the top media now, the guys at Harvard and MIT and all of those. But these are the elite of the system. And many of them, because I sat in classes with them, know little or nothing about Africa or developing world. But unfortunately, these are the people who are put on the plane when there's a crisis. And they come and they get out of the plane and they get whatever basic knowledge they know, and they write a report on Washington Post, New York Times, and the rest. So all these media organizations have to get to a point where they say, you have an enormous world here in Europe and here of diasporans like you guys who know the Western society, but who also know the developing world. Why is it that they don't use you to help them have a perspective that is close to reality, than have these people who parachute as journalists and write stories? You know, so it is still, in my opinion, a colonial mentality, a colonial strategy that is there. It is only subtle. And unfortunately, we turn to these elite newspapers that are the agenda setters of global politics. If the Washington Post has written it, the New York Times has written it, the Wall Street Journal has written it, then it is the story. But how true is it? Is it the reality? So those are the challenges that we have today. But it all comes back to my field, which is politics. It's all about power. Those who have the means to determine the agenda of global politics are the ones who run it. So what are we to do who don't have power? What we have to do is what you are doing now. Because by drawing attention to African news, by bringing people in Denver and the community to be paying attention to it, it's already a major step forward. And can you imagine if we could spread this around the United States, Canada, and in Europe, that people in the diaspora, whether they're Asian, African, should be putting their issues to the forefront and playing a part, not only in the media, but in politics as well, and getting to those positions of power, then we can begin to talk about a global community that respects each other, and that would change this dynamic of the West dictating its will on the rest of the world.
Thank you. So let me ask a final question before we go to our audience. Now, are there any particular things that you think is going well for the African continent which you think may not be reported? I know I can give some examples. We can talk about some of the elections that have taken place recently, like in Senegal, in Nigeria, the DRC, elections coming up in South Africa. Are there things that you think those African leaders, because sometimes when that news gets out there, some people would argue that it's our African leaders that have causing the problems, making the New York Times to write about those bad stories. Do you think there are certain particular things that are going on right that we need to know about?
Yes, I was in Cameroon for the last 3 years, and I was in Ghana in 2015, and I was very impressed by what I saw in Ghana in terms of infrastructure. I drove all the way from Accra to Cape Coast to Kumasi and back, and to see a country with roads, real roads on the continent was refreshing, because it helped with those kinds of roads. It helped Burkina Faso and the landlocked countries, and that is what we should be doing. Those countries that have the coastline, if they can develop the kinds of roads I saw in Ghana, that is going to help the others develop. In Cameroon, I was appalled that 25 years ago I could drive in Yaoundé, but it would be a suicidal mission for me to get on the wheel in Yaoundé today. Nobody respects the traffic lights. There are too many people in the city, too many people driving cars, and it's anarchy on the street. And you begin to ask yourself, how can 25 years later a country has regressed that much? So we have serious problems like those, and that is just an example. But when you look at Rwanda, I haven't been there, but the reports I'm hearing from there is that you have a dictator, but they are taking strides in at least doing a few things right. Maybe the trauma of the genocide woke them up to say, we've got to do things better. But do we have to be waiting for genocides and conflict to wake up? You are in cities like Yaoundé, where I have been the last 3 years, every December. Every 2 days, the water is up and the electricity is up. How can leaders not figure out, half a century later, after independence, how to make it possible for water to be available for the citizens, energy to be available? Development must be anchored on those bases. But then you have a cabinet of more than 60, 70 ministers. It's absurd. So those are some of the challenges. So what is happening that I could say is positive? You have the things that I never thought could happen. We had a long time ago just a government radio and television. Now the place is flooded with private radios and television. We can criticize their quality, but they are there, which is good. So maybe down the road something will happen. A long time ago there was only one university. Now there are several state universities. We can quarrel about the quality of infrastructure. And in addition, there are private universities, which means there are people in the country who have the means to create those because the demand is high. So there are those kinds of things that indicate that there is a thirst for education, there is a thirst for business to prosper, and it only needs the leadership that is visionary, that unfortunately is not there for now. One of the things to end, I would say, is that when you look at those elections you mentioned, should we be celebrating that they're elections? Maybe, but look at all those elections and ask yourself, of the political parties, what were the platforms? I looked and I don't see platforms in which case I said, what do you stand for when it comes to a vision for your country? Besides the fact that you belong to one ethnic group and everybody of your ethnic group is going to vote for you. But what do you stand for in terms of a national agenda? So politicians have to figure out what they stand for the economy, for education, for public health, and then show how different they are from their opponents, and educate the people to know those differences and then vote accordingly. Because until now, we are still voting personalities, we are still voting ethnic affiliations, but that is not going to bring about democracy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ben Bongang, Professor of Journalism and Political Science, Savannah State University. Dr. Bongang, we appreciate you joining us on this World Press Freedom Day 2019 on the Africa News Night program with Africa Agenda. Thank you so much, Dr. Bongang, for joining us.
Oh, I really appreciate your invitation, and I hope your guests can think about these things we've been talking about, and each of us needs to play a role in improving the conditions.
Thank you so much, and we will keep in touch with you, Dr. Bongang. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Have a good time.
Thank you. And as we take leave of Dr. Bongang, I'm going to turn the discussion now to the audience that we have here with us.